seeing as it's now January, I finally got around to watching Violent Night, the Die Hard in a House but with Santa film, and you know, I thought it was pretty fun. Very mean-spirited, little bit tacky, kind of all over the place, but just generally entertaining enough. But weirdly, all the way through watching Violent Night, I kept getting reminded of another film I'd seen, not the obvious one of course, Die Hard, but actually another violent Die Hard in a House at Christmas film, which is of course 2021's Babysitter Must Die, from director Kohl. And you know, thinking about it really got me in the mood to check it out again, and so I did. Now, I watched this when it first came out about 18 months ago, and I remembered thinking that it was on the whole again pretty enjoyable, but with one major reservation. I'm going to come back to that big but later on, but the question for now is Babysitter Must Die still worth a watch? Is it pretty entertaining, or did I just happen to be in a really good mood the first time I saw it? So the basic plot here, like I said, is that he's doing that Die Hard idea, but in a house. Our lead character, Josie Jane, has agreed to babysit a young girl so that the girl's parents can go out to a Christmas party. As they're about to leave, there's a knock at the door and they're suddenly invaded by this trio of black-clad terrorists. Josie manages to hide from them before they see her so that they don't even know that she's in the house, and so whilst our evil trio are tying up the family members and tearing apart their house so that they can find what they want, Josie has to figure out a way of staying out of sight and rescuing the family members, armed only with her own very special, very unique range of scouting skills. So first things first, the good news is that yes, Babysitter Must Die is still, on a rewatch, a fun little film. Beneath that tacky, slutty title is a film with heart and style, and maybe most importantly, a very good use of what are clearly limited resources. And without saying that this is like an absolute classic or anything, I think this film is pretty much what I'd think of as a low-budget gem. It's a film that doesn't cost much, that's made by people that clearly believe in what they're doing, who want to make something that's more than just a deliberately so bad it's good type film or just some trashy exploitation schlock. It's a film that knows realistically what it can get away with doing on the budget it's got, and it sets about doing it as well as it possibly can. But I'm going to get my biggest beef out of the way right up front, because it's kind of like the elephant in the room. My main memories of this film are that it was a cool little movie that suffered from having a really ugly colour grade that kind of brought the whole thing down. That it's a film that should be bright and colourful and look cool, but instead they've decided to tint everything this kind of blue and piddly beige colour and to just desaturate the whole picture. Now, to be honest, I still kind of think that. I still think the post-production colour grading on this film is a problem, and the sad thing is, that's not something that's come about as a result of a lack of resources. It's not a script problem, or an acting problem, or an effects problem, or a cinematography problem, things that can be sorted out by the people making the film as they go along, as part of the ongoing organic filmmaking process. Of all the things to fuck up, a crappy colour tinting is probably amongst the most inexcusable, especially as ultimately it affects every single frame of the film. It covers everything that's been done up until the point that somebody on a computer somewhere has decided to take the saturation right down and to punch up the blues and the greys. But with that out of the way, having flagged up my biggest problem, let's get into the good stuff, what I really like about Babysitter Must Die. And the first thing is that it's very tightly paced. It runs to about 70 minutes if you shave off the credits, and that is, as it turns out, just about the right length for a tight, pacey home invasion thriller to run to, without having to move the action away from the four walls of the house. By comparison, Violent Night takes things outside, introduces a whole bunch of other characters, and ends up with vehicular chases and fights in the snow and all sorts. It gets to a point where it just stops being basically Die Hard in a House, that nice tight contained little thriller, whereas Babysitter Must Die is less of an action film and more of just a simple tight home invasion type drama. And that ties into the second thing that I really like about it, which is that it keeps things grounded. It doesn't descend into that big, daft action movie territory, even on its own much smaller scale. There's a weight that's given to things that other filmmakers might just take for granted. It makes you realise that you're in a world where the filmmakers are taking things seriously by reinvesting action film cliches with a real physical kind of cause and effect that only makes the ultimate threat feel all the more real, and it makes it seem harder for Josie Jane herself to actually turn the tables and fight back. Because the main idea is that Josie Jane, who spent many years in the Scouts honing all her different scouting skills, has built up enough expertise in a range of disciplines to let her ultimately fight back against the terrorists, and as soon as they bust down the door, we're just waiting for Josie to fight back. And yet, she isn't just this totally cliched, ass-kicking, one-liner spewing action movie heroine who's totally overpowered in every way. The threat of these terrorists is real. She isn't infallible, and she fucks up every bit as much as she triumphs. The fact that Josie Jane takes a long time to finally get to the stage where she's willing to finally fight back helps to show that this is a film that doesn't take its tropiness for granted. It has to earn that moment as a believable turning point in Josie's evolution as a character that's in a grounded setting, before eventually then letting her emerge as this multi-talented heroine that we've always expected her to become. Thirdly, and probably one of the most surprising things that you'd find about a film called Babysitter Must Die, and that is that it's actually not in any way a horror comedy. It takes its situations totally seriously, and any comedy that there is always comes at moments when it feels natural as an extension of the characters themselves.
Still jesting.
I think it's really too easy when you're making a tiny budgeted film to just poke fun at yourself and to make something that's knowingly bad, because you know most people are very snobbish about low budget films. To me, it takes balls to make a low budget film totally seriously and to ask your audience to buy into what you're selling, and I'm all for that. So tied into that is the next point, which is the villains and the specific threat that they pose. Our trio of villains in this, who at first might seem kind of gimmicky, but what's interesting isn't that they're just a bunch of naughty baddies out to do bad things, but to paraphrase David Cronenberg's Videodrome, that they ultimately have a philosophy. They're members of an unnamed apocalypse-worshipping cult who are looking for this mystical artifact that's been buried in the house. They've ritualistically scarred themselves to show their devotion to the cause, and there's a couple of cool scenes where they get to speak about their beliefs and ideals that help to make them feel dangerous. They're not just three heavies, they're representatives of a much larger force. Again, a good way of suggesting a much greater threat with limited resources. However, in regards to their philosophies, is point number 5, which is that this is a film that, for its short running time, isn't afraid to still leave certain things up to your imagination. The villains don't turn up explaining who they are and what they believe in. Dialogue is used sparingly throughout, and certain elements of their mythology are brought up in passing, but are never totally fully elaborated on, which makes total sense because these are single-minded zealots with a purpose and not baddies who are here to just wreak havoc and torture this innocent family. In fact, one of my absolute pet peeves in horror are those scenes where someone's on the brink of being tortured or having something horrible done to them, and they say to the baddie, "Why are you doing this?"
Why are you doing this?
That's probably my most hated line in horror, because it's just so lazy. It's just an excuse for the writer to lay on the line exactly what the villain's whole ethos is, the modern horror equivalent of the old "before you kill me, tell me what your plan is" thing from like James Bond films. Because the thing is, someone's about to torture you, you don't stop and say, "Why are you doing this?" because I'm pretty sure you wouldn't really care. But what I really love is that there's a scene in this where someone is about to say the dreaded "Why are you doing this?" and the main villain just smacks him in the mouth and tells him to shut up. To me, that's way more believable, and it helps to make our baddies seem much cooler and more mysterious, not knowing entirely what it is that they're up to. There's a real economy of action, both in what they do and how they move and how they speak and interact with each other and the rest of the family, that really sells the threat, along with keeping certain elements of their motivation hidden in order to give the feeling that there's something that's truly apocalyptic on the way. And in a film called Babysitter Must Die, that's got this kind of a poster, I mean, I think that's pretty impressive. Because what it all adds up to is that it shows that there's thought gone into all of this, that the makers of this film aren't content to just churn out some low-effort exploitation for that famously unfussy horror audience, but they want to do something more. For the average viewer, maybe this is just a very low-budget, cheap-looking film with a shitty colour grade that you'd expect to just be goofy and ridiculous. For people who can see past the superficial and are willing to judge films in their own weight categories for what they are and can appreciate something very sincere being made on a minuscule budget, this is a really entertaining, well put together, economically paced, tight little film with a lot of fun ideas and a lot of heart, with a shitty colour grade.